Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. On this episode, we've been talking about legacy sequels. This one takes place 36 years after the original. Beetlejuice came out in 1988. And in order to know where we are going, we got to know where we have been. The history of Beetlejuice is pretty interesting. Tim Burton is a very dynamic director. You see a single frame of a Tim Burton movie, and you probably automatically know it's him. He has a very distinct style, dates back to his first film that he directed, Pee Wee's Big Adventure, which I kind of forgot he did. And usually for episodes like this, I do a deep dive into a director and watch all their movies and rank their movies, and maybe another episode I'll do that. The reason I didn't want to do that this time is because I didn't want to torture myself with Tim Burton's bad movies, because he has a pretty wide range of really good top tier movies, which I would consider the original Beetlejuice to probably be his signature movie, the one that put him on the map. After that one, he got Batman, he did Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns. I would say in the 2000s, his quality diminished, at least when it came to the live action stuff. And depending on what version of Tim Burton you like, you could be all into his animated movies, which he does really well. I don't think he really misses when it comes to his animated movies, even later in his career with Frankenweenie being one of my favorite animated movies in the spooky genre. But he's also done movies that I just can't get behind. The remake of Willy Wonka, but Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I can't stand that movie. Alice in Wonderland, I didn't want to put myself through that Dark Shadows, all that. I didn't want to go back and rewatch. He had a lot of movies. So it was really Beetlejuice that put him on the map. And the reason he got that movie is because Pee Wee's Big Adventure was such a major success. Did really well. It had that quirky style, a lot of practical effects, which he is known for, which I love. I talk about that all the time. So Warner Brothers saw that and they had him do Beetlejuice, which they were able to make for only $15 million. And another thing I just always stress is the reason Hollywood loves anything in the horror genre, which I really don't classify Beetlejuice to be a horror movie. Dark comedy, has the spooky vibes, puts you in that spirit of Halloween. But even the original Beetlejuice came out in March in 1988. Didn't come out around Halloween time at all. And I will say Beetlejuice definitely leans more into those spooky vibes coming out in September leading up to Halloween. I feel like this one a little bit more rewatchable around Halloween because I didn't really associate the first one with Halloween, just it becoming a cult classic, even though it had the commercial success. It just started to become associated with the Halloween time. But they were able to make it for that $15 million, and it ended up grossing $74 million at the box office. So a huge hit. And then the next year, 1989, he was given Batman, which those first two Batman movies I love. And that was at a time where the superhero genre isn't what it is today. There was no reference for anything really having success at the box office. And at the time, it was seen as darker and grittier, which is wild thinking now that we just had the Batman with Robert Pattinson a few years ago, and that was seen as like the darkest and grittiest one. But before that, it was Adam West surfing, and that was what we knew as Batman. But if you look back on those first two Batman films with Michael Keaton, those are two of my favorites just because as a kid, I watched those time and time again. Batman is in my top three superheroes of all time. But it has that Tim Burton vibe, that Tim Burton energy, a lot of practical effects, very dark. And those movies were marketed toward kids, which is kind of the same deal with Beetlejuice. The first one was rated PG. Beetlejuice drops the F-bomb in the first movie, and it still got a PG rating. There are scenes of him looking under, trying to get a glimpse under Gina Davis's skirt, and the movie still got a PG rating. Wild. Would not happen today. Very rarely do you even see a movie get a G rating. Unless it's Paw Patrol, pretty much at minimum, Pixar, Disney movies, they still get a PG rating. Very rare for anything to get a G rating because it has to be so squeaky clean. For that movie to get a PG rating is wild. Would definitely be PG-13 rating by today's standards, which is what Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is because you get the one F-bomb. Interesting thing that this one did, they had the two F-bombs in there, but the second one was bleeped out because you can't say it twice, then you get the R rating, and then it definitely changes the genre of the movie. You get a handful of S words. I think it's 3. I don't know if there's a strict code on how many you get, but they threw those around pretty generous here. So it's not a full on family movie, which I think a lot of people associate the first one with, but it was because of the original Beetlejuice, really why Tim Burton is where he is today. He makes movies for a relatively low budget, at least early in his career. They made a lot of money due to the profit margin. He really plays into the campy style in that first movie and also continuing in this sequel, using a lot of practical effects that look kind of cheesy, kind of cheap, but that's kind of his style, so it works. If you were doing it with purpose and intent, it doesn't look like you were cutting corners because he is able to use stop motion and claymation in a way that is very creative, very him, very dark, very macabre. So it really plays into his style, and that is what I like about Tim Burton. So if I were to handpick my favorite Tim Burton films, I would probably go back to the original Beetlejuice, his early work, the original Beetlejuice, the first 2 Batman movies, and then his animated work. I know a lot of people associate him with The Nightmare Before Christmas, but he actually didn't direct that movie. It just had his name attached to it. So I also love like Frankenweenie, Corpse Bride, pretty much anything you could go to Hot Topic to in the late to mid 2000s and get a t-shirt of. Like, oh man, he probably inspired so many goth kids' fashion choices. But that is Tim Burton. So that is the where we've been. Now, where are we going with the new Beetlejuice movie? This movie takes place 36 years after the original movie. You have a lot of the original cast back. Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara, who is fantastic, probably had a bit of a resurgence in her career from Schitt's Creek. But you also have, of course, Michael Keaton back as Beetlejuice. Who you don't have back is Alec Baldwin or Gina Davis. The movie does mention their characters a little bit, but it's not really revolving around that story whatsoever. And who gets introduced? Jenna Ortega as the daughter of Lydia. Her name is Astrid. She is very much like Winona Ryder was in the original movie, very angsty, very dark. What their story is, her dad died. Her mom has been struggling with the grief, and her mom, Lydia, is now a talk show host where she talks to the dead. But her daughter, Astrid, is upset with her because this whole time her career revolves around her talking to the dead. She has never talked to her dad. She holds that against her mom. Also, the beginning of the movie, Lydia's dad dies in a very tragic accident. And I laugh as I say that is because they do it in a very ridiculous way, which is what the Beetlejuice movies do. There is some death and killing. I would say it's a little bit darker in this one, but it's very campy. So even Kelsey, who really wasn't too interested in watching this movie, doesn't really like anything Halloween based. I will say it's not overly grotesque in any way because it's all very playful, all very fun. There is like some blood splatter, but it's nothing you would see in like a slasher film. So Astrid is having a very hard time having a good relationship with her mom. And then you have Beetlejuice's story, which I love the fact that there's the A plot and the B plot, which in the first movie, Beetlejuice was only on screen, I think like 18 minutes out of that entire movie. Michael Keaton definitely gets a lot more screen time in this one. He is dealing with his ex-wife who has come back to life and wants to kill him. So how the two stories intersect is what makes this movie a lot of fun. It's right around an hour and 36 minutes. And I will say, I found myself pleasantly entertained throughout the entire movie. I think it's because I realized it's been so long since we've had a movie that is just fun and quirky. It is such a risk to make a movie like this, and it wasn't back in the 80s. You could do fun and ridiculous movies, but now I feel like there's almost this standard of you can't have fun. You have to do all these things right in order to get people behind your movie. And it was nice to see all of the quirkiness go up a level. A lot of the visuals, which they kept a lot of the practical effects, just had this refined style, which I've been talking about in the episode of how you make a movie in the 80s and you make a movie now, you can just make it look so much better. So a lot of the effects look a lot less dated. And it was just fun to see a movie be ridiculous and to be absurd. And I'm just happy that a movie like this can still be made. That being said, if this movie was the original movie, would it be as a cult classic, as big of a hit as Beetlejuice would have been in the 80s? I don't think so. I think storytelling obviously has changed a lot from 1988 to 2024, but it just has like this different feeling to it. There are a lot more beats in the story on this one, which the first one was primarily a couple died, they're living in their house, they're stuck there, and they want the family out. They enlist the help of Beetlejuice. This one definitely had a lot more going on that felt a little bit more like they had more of a script to work with. There was a lot more character development, but it did just kind of lack the original novelty that the first movie had. And I think that's just what you get in a legacy sequel. It's obviously not going to be as groundbreaking as the first one. So I will say, while that first one felt a little bit more rebellious to see what Tim Burton could get away with, making his first really big career defining movie, this one just felt a little bit more corporate. And I think that's just the nature of movies now. And I could kind of see the strings being pulled here and there. I still feel like overall he had full reign to do whatever he wanted, but it definitely felt much more like he was working inside some parameters, definitely kind of inside a box that nothing really went outside of. But there were some really great performances. Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, I would say, was pretty on par with the original. Although, I don't know, I kind of feel like Michael Keaton just does things for the paycheck now. It still kind of hurts me what he said about the Batgirl movie, that he was just like, I don't care that it never came out. I still got paid. I just kind of feel that he feels that way about all the projects he takes on. He's like, yeah, I'll do the Flash. I'll be Batman again. I'll be Beetlejuice again. As long as the check clears, I will be there. So he gave a good performance. I don't think he went over the top to make it great, but hands down, the best performance to me was Jenna Ortega. To me, she just solidified herself with this movie as being the go-to horror queen. She just has that aura about her. She is such a great actor. Really, to me, it feels like she believes in all the roles she takes on. Even if she doesn't, she's a really great actor, convincing us that she does. Even the press tour she did, doing the odes to all the costumes from the original movie. She's just fantastic in everything I watch her in. Big Wednesday vibes in this movie, which I did feel like this movie had more of an Addams Family vibes than it did Beetlejuice vibes from the original. Then you have Winona Ryder, who I love her in Stranger Things. She's having a big resurgence now. I feel from that. She looks fantastic. Even the scenes that flash back to the original movie, I'm like, she's hardly aged a bit. Catherine O'Hara, who is just, I would say, the funniest in this movie, had the best one-liners, and I just see her as Myra Rose from Schitt's Creek, which has also been a big part of her resurgence. I mean, she was in Home Alone, in the original Beetlejuice. They brought her back. She was fantastic. Willem Dafoe, dude has to have the best agent in Hollywood. I feel like I've seen him 3 times in 3 different movies this year alone, and he's great in all of them. Seeing him do quirky horror is like A+ Willem Dafoe. I loved all the mixed mediums, having the stop motion, the claymation that we all recognize from the first one. And overall was just a really fun film from start to finish. But again, since it is a legacy sequel, I have to compare it to the first one, which normally when there's a big, just iconic movie, one of the best movies of the 80s, I usually rate those movies a 5 out of 5. But for me, I don't even think the original Beetlejuice is a 5 out of 5. Even though it's mostly perfect, I would probably give the original Beetlejuice a 4.5 out of 5. I don't think the sequel is as good as that one, even though it looks a lot better. I just don't think that this movie is going to have the same impact that that first one did, which would probably be really hard to do. But I do see myself actually being more inclined to watch this one around Halloween time, because it just has that setting. It has that feeling a little bit more to me. So for Beetlejuice, I give it 4 out of 5 striped suits.